Inspiration for Teachers podcast, bringing you dynamic and inspirational educator interviews. Our fascinating guests share their professional challenges and creative resolutions for success. Discover their workable strategies, ideas, and resources to reach your educational goals. And now your host, Kelly Long.
Welcome once again. I'm pleased that you've downloaded this week's episode of Inspiration for Teachers, and I'm thrilled to be joined by this week's guest, Alex Jeffries Hill, who will be enlightening us on the strategies he employed in developing the skills of TAs in delivering maths interventions. Alex will also be discussing action research. Alex is Head of Year 3 and Science at a local primary school in Southampton. He has been a teacher for 10 years and currently holds a world record alongside his Year 3 pupils for ukulele playing. Hi Alex, and welcome to the show.
Hi Kelly, thank you for inviting me.
On the show, we like to warm up our guests by playing a little game of random question generator. Oh, I love this question. If you could offer a piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Oh, okay. I would say I was a real worrier. I'd probably say don't worry, it's going to be okay.
Alex, please can you share with our listeners what excites you right now about the teaching profession?
The thing that excites me at the moment is something I've picked up from being on various courses recently. There seems to be this sort of change in culture in teaching. All children can achieve. It shouldn't be the case that, your low achievers, so to speak, inverted commas, should always chug along behind your high achievers. That we can close that gap, and this idea it should be about, if the kids aren't getting it, we as teachers need to change the way we're presenting things, the way we're teaching. This idea of kids keeping up, not catching up, that we should have high expectations of the kids, and it is possible for them to improve, and it shouldn't be okay for them just to lag behind and us just accept it.
Do you have any examples of how you would address a low achieving group of pupils or individual pupil?
I would talk to the child. It seems obvious, but we need to actually properly talk to the kids and find out what it is they don't get, what it is that they enjoy, what their attitude is towards learning. Once that's found out, we can start to put a plan in place for, filling those gaps. I think another big issue is self-esteem. The kids who really believe in themselves will take those risks to get stuff wrong and learn from it, and those kids who just have no self-confidence won't even take that chance. Yeah. There's a bit of research recently come out by a researcher called Hatty, analysed educational research over the last 15 years, looking at all the elements of good teaching that have an impact on kids. The most successful schools are the ones where the teachers have the skills, the right set of skills, and are teaching the right way. And when the children have those attitudes where they believe they can achieve, there's high expectations, and they think there's no limit to what they can achieve. Also, there's a professor of maths at Stanford called Boaler, who looks very much at this idea that a lot of people think they can or they can't do maths, and it's like, you're either good at maths or you're not, and she says that's wrong. This mindset, you need to have a growth mindset where you feel that you could get better at anything rather than a fixed mindset, which relates to the work of Carol Dweck. So all these things together are the sort of things I'm excited about in education.
And here's our thought-provoking question. What would you most like to change about education and why?
It might seem a bit selfish, but I'd quite like to change the salary. I think it's a symbolic thing. If teachers are given a certain amount more, then within society they will be more respected, the status will be raised, the expectations of the teachers will be raised, and I think the teachers will raise their game.
Please can you share with us, Alex, the challenges that you have faced?
My first challenge is to do with a trend within my school's data. Basically, the trend shows that a certain group of low-achieving children don't make sufficient progress from the end of Key Stage 1 to the end of Key Stage 2. So looking at teacher assessment and Raise Online data, they just don't make those two levels of progress consistently enough. So as Year 3 teacher, it's key that we get these kids a good start in Key Stage 2. The task really was to put in interventions in maths, which will identify these kids, what the kids can't do, and put a plan in place for plugging those gaps. Ordinarily, each of the classes in the year group have a teaching assistant, and they will take those low-achieving kids out for extra booster sessions. But I felt that we could do it in a more sort of strategic way.
And what was your particular involvement in that initiative?
The first thought was, okay, we've got these kids who are struggling. Do we just send them out with the TA? with some instructions, or do we have a more sort of coherent approach to it? So I suppose the first point was do it in a more coherent way. Next was finding the resources, and luckily we've got our deputy head who is very happy to get involved and share expertise and train people up. And then it's just a logistical case of organising the time and giving the teaching assistant the time to speak with the children and learn the process.
Can you give us an example of the types of intervention questions or the techniques that she would have used when asking a pupil, what can you do and what can't you do?
So it would be a case of saying to the kids, here's a 3-digit number, can you make this number? Can you write it in digits? Could you draw a picture of it? First of all, to get their understanding of, do they have a concept of what a certain number looks like and what it is, rather than just being able to regurgitate the digits that show that number. And then it was a case of manipulating the number. What's 10 more, 10 less, 100 more, 100 less? What's changing as you add 10? So it's all that sort of place value, manipulating numbers, understanding the number system kinds of questions.
Did you see any significant change between the intervention at the start and what the pupils were achieving at the end?
Well, definitely, yeah. The kids made good progress. The aim is for them to keep up, not catch up. They all either made really good progress, or by the end of the year we knew exactly what they couldn't do, so we could pass that information on to the next year group so they could plug that gap. So they're not starting from scratch again, trying to work out what kids can't do.
And did you discover any particular impact on the teaching assistants?
For me, it was TA growing in confidence. She had a lot more ownership over the process. I think we need to value teaching assistants, and it kind of goes back to the whole thing about money. Teaching assistants get paid not much. They do such a good job and a hard job, and I think it just, to see her feel valued was great.
And something that you're very passionate about, Alex, is action research. Please, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this isn't so much of a challenge, but was an area that our school had focused on, based on Hatty's research, that the kinds of schools that are most successful are the ones where the teachers are reflective and constantly trying to improve their practice. And one way of doing this is through action research. So we picked 3 areas to focus on within the school: assessment for learning, writing, and feedback to pupils. They're quite high on Hatty's list of most effective approaches within education, and I think writing was on there because it was a school focus. The staff were split into the 3 groups. The idea was that they would trial an idea within their classroom. So, for example, within the feedback to pupils group, a couple of the teachers looked at verbal feedback versus written feedback, i.e. are the marking comments we put in books, how useful are they? Are we assessing for learning, or are we assessing for accountability? Are we just doing it to tick the boxes? So they split their class into 2. Half the class, they marked their books as normal, and children responded to their marking comments as normal. And half the class, they gave verbal feedback to at the moment of learning, or as close to as they could, but didn't write in their books. The idea was, with any of this action research, that the teachers would do this book-ending questionnaire. So they would, before they did anything, they'd do a questionnaire. So they'd probably say to the kids something like, what do you think of marking? Why do teachers mark? How useful are the marking comments? How much does it help you to learn? So they would do a questionnaire at the beginning, and then they'd do the same questionnaire at the end to sort of measure impact. The feedback from the questionnaire on feedback was that the kids who got the verbal feedback really liked having it there and then, instantly, and it really helped them learn, because it wasn't that they'd done a whole lesson, had their book marked, and then realised, I could have done that at the start of the lesson.
So what did the children prefer?
They preferred the verbal feedback, because it was a little moment of one-to-one time with the teacher, and that was right, well done, now what's your next step, or, if they got it wrong, what went wrong and how to rectify it, and that sort of thing. A
big challenge when it comes to marking is that sometimes you mark a set of books and it can be a week before that child then looks at that book and they forgot what they did. The impact that feedback has is significantly diminished.
Yeah. So all the teachers had different focuses. But all the teachers then, at the end, we did a kind of a speed learning information sharing session. So we all sat around tables, and we had 5 minutes to share our sort of nugget of impact from the action research. And then we would rotate around the table, so we'd all get to see what each other had done, what the idea was, what the outcome was, and it was really good. It was kind of...
So what do you think the greatest value was that everybody took away from that?
Probably the most useful thing, we had to do a little write-up, and it wasn't a big onerous thing, but it followed the sort of academic research model. There was a kind of an abstract summary of what we were doing. and what was our question, what did we do, what did we find out, and our next steps, and kind of going through that process just got you thinking so much more deeply about what you were doing. And it was just good to try something out in your class. You know, theoretically works, but trying to make it work in the complicated arena of a classroom was really, really interesting.
Sounds as though it was trying to challenge you all to think reflectively and regularly.
Definitely, yeah. Improving what you're doing, and kind of reminded me of a comment I heard on a radio play where these two teachers are having an argument. One teacher said, I've been teaching for 40 years. And this other teacher said, no, you haven't. You've taught for 1 year and you've taught the same year 40 times. So just because you've always done it like that doesn't mean it's the right way.
I think it's quite easy to get stagnant in your teaching, isn't it? So, you know, switching up a little bit and opening your mind to different ways and different approaches, it's really important. Keeps you fresh.
Doesn't mean change everything, just be reflective enough to keep the things that work and just tweak the things that could be improved.
And now, Alex, we're moving on to our inspiration round. Please can you share with our listeners the best advice you have ever been given?
To always keep in mind, whenever you do anything in school, ask yourself the question, will it have an impact on the kids' learning? If it doesn't, ask yourself why you're doing it.
Do you have a resource that you could recommend for our listeners?
I think a book I mentioned earlier by Boaler called The Elephant in the Classroom is a really good resource if you're teaching maths. It's about getting kids to love maths, getting them to realise that you're not just good at maths or not good at maths. Anyone can be good at maths. It's just down to how you approach it and, you know, how to structure it and how to teach it. So that's one really good book called The Lazy Teacher's Handbook by Mick Waters. What it's about is it's about teaching less so that kids learn more, you know, getting the kids to be more involved in their learning.
A to Z of teaching.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Loads of tips. Really good to dip in and out of.
Excellent, thank you. And Alex, can you share with us a professional habit that works for you time and again?
I've had to deal with quite a few challenging children who tend to refuse doing work, don't always make the right choices. It can be so frustrating in every lesson if children are challenging. One of the most important things to do is to separate the behaviour from the child. You know, it's not that the child is bad, it's that they're making bad choices, and you can get into that mindset of realising that they're just choosing to do it, and then that gives them the option to choose not to do it. If you just label them as a bad child, then they're just going to feel and behave like a bad child for the rest of the time.
So if I was a pupil in your classroom and I was refusing point blank to do any work, what strategy would you put in place to encourage me to do some work?
Calmness is key. I think the children react to the way we react. I think they can mirror us. And if they see that what they do winds us up, then they'll push that button even more. I talk to my kids a lot about choice, making them realise that they're in control. They've got the choice and there's two options.
Alex, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Before we say goodbye, please can you tell us where our listeners can get in contact with you?
They can email me on alexjeffrieshill@gmail.com. And you can reach me on Twitter. My username is @allywag77.
Thank you for joining us today on Inspiration for Teachers. For more resources, tips and advice, visit our website, inspirationforteachers.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love to connect with you. Just click like on our Facebook page at facebook.com/inspirationforteachers.